My son's new tutor suggested doubling their sessions. She said he was falling behind. His grades kept dropping anyway. I installed a recording app on his tablet. What I heard in those sessions made me call the police that same night. The recording was 11 minutes and 43 seconds long. I listened to the first 2 minutes standing in my kitchen with a beer halfway to my mouth. By minute 4, the bottle was on the counter, untouched, and my hands were gripping the edge of the granite so hard my knuckles had gone white. By minute 7, I was sitting on the floor with my back against the refrigerator, tears running down my face, unable to breathe properly. By minute 11, I was dialing 911 with fingers that wouldn't stop trembling, whispering into the phone because my son was asleep upstairs, and I didn't want him to hear what I'd just heard playing back through his own tablet. The dispatcher asked me what my emergency was. I opened my mouth 3 times before words came out. "Someone is hurting my son," I finally said. My voice sounded like it belonged to someone else, thin and fractured and stripped of everything that made me sound like a father who had things under control. Because I didn't. I hadn't for months. And the worst part, the part that would keep me awake for the next 300 nights, was that I'd invited the person doing it directly into my home and thanked her for showing up on time. My name is Graham Aldridge. I'm 41 years old. I work as a civil engineer for a mid-sized infrastructure firm in Charlotte, North Carolina. I design stormwater management systems, which is exactly as boring as it sounds, but it pays well and it's steady, and it let me buy a 3-bedroom house in the Dilworth neighborhood when my son Nolan was 2. Nolan is 9 now, 4th grade at Sedgefield Elementary. He's small for his age, sandy brown hair that falls in his eyes no matter how many times I brush it back, a gap between his front teeth that the dentist says will close on its own, and a laugh that sounds like it comes from somewhere deeper than a kid his size should be able to produce. He loves dinosaurs, Minecraft, and building elaborate marble runs out of cardboard tubes and tape. He's the kind of kid who asks questions that make you stop and think, like why do ambulances have mirrors that spell backwards? Or if gravity pulls everything down, how do trees know to grow up? His mother, Justine, and I divorced when he was 5. Joint custody. Justine moved to Raleigh with her new husband and took a position at Duke Hospital as an oncology nurse. She's a good mother. We co-parent well enough, alternating weeks, splitting holidays. When Nolan is with me, it's just the 2 of us in that 3-bedroom house with too many rooms and not enough noise. I do my best. But single fatherhood has a way of making you feel like you're always one step behind the emergency you haven't seen yet. Nolan started struggling in school at the beginning of his 4th grade year, right around September. His teacher, Mrs. Adebayo, sent home a progress report in the 3rd week that made my stomach clench. She was a kind woman, late 50s, silver-streaked hair always pulled into a bun, 28 years in elementary education. She'd taught half the kids in Dilworth at one point or another. Her note was careful, but direct. "Nolan is having difficulty with reading comprehension and math fundamentals," she wrote. "He seems distracted in class, reluctant to participate. I'd like to schedule a conference at your earliest convenience." I called Justine that night and we talked it through. "Maybe it's the transition between houses," she said. "He's been quieter with me too." We agreed to monitor it. I sat with Nolan every evening and worked through his homework with him. He tried hard. I could see him trying. But the numbers swam on the page and the reading passages seemed to drain the light out of his eyes. By October, his grades had dropped from B's to C's. Mrs. Adebayo suggested a tutor. She gave me 3 names. The first 2 didn't have availability until January. The third was Lorraine Ashby. Lorraine Ashby came with excellent references. She had a bachelor's degree in elementary education from UNC Charlotte, a state teaching certificate that she kept current, even though she'd left the classroom 4 years earlier to tutor privately, and a website with 12 glowing testimonials from parents across the South Charlotte area. She was 34, tall, athletic build, dark blonde hair usually pulled back in a practical ponytail. She wore glasses with thin silver frames and carried a canvas tote bag printed with the words, "Reading is my superpower." She shook my hand firmly when we met at my front door for the first session. "I've worked with a lot of kids like Nolan," she said, smiling warmly. "Sometimes they just need someone who isn't mom or dad to unlock what's already there." She charged $85 an hour. Sessions were twice a week, Mondays and Thursdays, 4 to 5:30 in the afternoon. She worked with Nolan at the dining room table while I was usually in my home office down the hall, close enough to hear if anything went wrong but far enough to give them space. The first few weeks seemed promising. Nolan came out of sessions looking lighter, even smiling sometimes. "She's nice, Dad," he told me after the 3rd session. "She doesn't yell when I get stuff wrong." That comment broke my heart a little because it meant someone, somewhere, had yelled at him for getting stuff wrong before. I made a mental note to talk to Mrs. Adebayo about classroom dynamics. By the end of November, though, something shifted. Nolan's grades didn't improve. They got worse. His reading comprehension scores dropped to the bottom quartile on the school's benchmark assessment. His math facts accuracy, which had been at 78% in September, fell to 51%. Mrs. Adebayo called me on a Friday afternoon, her voice careful but concerned. "I don't want to alarm you, Mr. Aldridge, but Nolan seems more withdrawn than before the tutoring began. He's not raising his hand at all anymore. He put his head down during independent reading yesterday and wouldn't look up for 20 minutes. I hung up and sat in my car in the office parking lot for 15 minutes, staring at nothing. That night, I asked Nolan how tutoring was going. He was sitting on his bed in his dinosaur pajamas, arranging plastic Triceratops figures in a line on his nightstand. Fine, he said without looking up. Is Lorraine helping? Do you feel like you're learning? He shrugged. I guess. You can tell me if something's wrong, buddy. You know that, right? He looked up at me then, and something flickered across his face, something quick and complicated that I couldn't read. His mouth opened slightly, then closed. Nothing's wrong, Dad. He went back to the Triceratops. I kissed his forehead and turned off the light. But I lay awake until 2 in the morning, replaying that flicker across his face, trying to decode it. Something was wrong. I could feel it the way you feel a change in air pressure before a storm, not visible yet, but present and gathering force. In December, Lorraine suggested doubling the sessions, 4 times a week instead of 2, Mondays, Wednesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays. He's further behind than I initially assessed, she told me in my kitchen while Nolan was in his room. The gaps in his foundational skills are significant. If we don't address them aggressively now, he'll fall further behind in 5th grade, and the gap becomes exponential. More sessions means more cost, obviously, but I genuinely believe this is what he needs. I looked at her standing there in my kitchen with her canvas tote and her concerned expression and her state teaching certificate, and I felt grateful. This woman cared about my son's education enough to suggest more work for herself. I agreed immediately. $340 a week. I told myself it was worth it. Justine agreed to split the cost. Whatever he needs, she said on the phone. But Graham, something's off. He doesn't want to talk about school at all when he's here. He used to tell me everything. I know, I said. I'm watching it. I'm paying attention. But I wasn't watching closely enough. Not yet. January arrived cold and gray. The extra sessions had been running for 3 weeks, and Nolan was getting worse across every measurable dimension. His grades continued to slide. His appetite decreased. He started having nightmares, waking up at 1 or 2 in the morning crying about things he couldn't or wouldn't describe. Bad dreams, he'd say when I rushed in, pulling his blankets up to his chin. Just bad dreams, Daddy. The word Daddy instead of Dad sent ice water through my veins because he hadn't called me that since he was 6. He started biting his fingernails until they bled. He stopped asking to have friends over on weekends. He stopped building marble runs. The cardboard tubes and tape sat untouched in the corner of his room, gathering dust. One Saturday morning in mid-January, I walked past the dining room during a session and heard Lorraine's voice, low and sharp, a tone I'd never heard from her before. We talked about this, Nolan. You know the rules. I stopped in the hallway, listening. Nolan's voice came back small, barely a whisper. I don't want to. You don't get to decide that. We've been over this. Are you going to make me disappointed again? Silence from Nolan. Good. Now focus. I stood in the hallway for 30 seconds, heart hammering. Then I told myself I'd misheard it, misinterpreted it. She was being firm, not cruel. Tutors had to set boundaries. Kids needed structure. I walked back to my office and stared at my computer screen without seeing it. That night, Nolan threw up his dinner, and I held him over the toilet, rubbing his back, telling him it was okay. When he was done, he looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes and said something that didn't make sense at the time. Am I bad, Dad? What? You're not bad, buddy. Why would you say that? Because she says I am. Who says you're bad? He went quiet, stared at the bathroom tile. Nobody. I imagined it. He went to bed. I sat on the bathroom floor and pressed my palms against my eyes until I saw stars. She says I am. She. The next morning I called Lorraine. Just checking in, I said, keeping my voice casual, friendly. How do you think the extra sessions are going? Really well, she said brightly. Nolan's making progress. It's slow, but that's normal for kids with his learning profile. The gaps didn't form overnight, and they won't close overnight either. Has he said anything about not wanting to come? Oh, she laughed softly. Every kid resists sometimes. That's actually a sign that we're pushing into areas where real growth happens. Discomfort is part of learning, Graham. I wanted to believe her. I tried to believe her. She had a degree and a teaching certificate and 12 testimonials from satisfied parents and a website with a professional headshot and a canvas tote bag that said reading was her superpower. She was the expert, and I was just a father who designed drainage systems and couldn't figure out why his kid was falling apart. But that night, lying in bed at midnight, I made a decision. I picked up my phone and downloaded an app called Parent Shield. It was a monitoring application designed for children's devices, tablets, and phones that allowed parents to remotely activate audio recording during specified time periods. It cost $14.99 a month. I logged into Nolan's tablet remotely, a Samsung Galaxy Tab that I'd bought him for his 8th birthday, installed the app, hid it in a nested folder, and set it to record audio from 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. every day that Lorraine was scheduled to come. I told myself I was overreacting. I told myself I'd listen to one session, hear nothing but normal tutoring, and feel embarrassed about my paranoia. I told myself this would put my mind at ease, and I'd delete the app and never think about it again. The first recording was from a Thursday. Lorraine arrived at 4:02. I heard the front door, her greeting, Nolan's small hello. For the first 20 minutes, it sounded normal. Lorraine walked him through a reading passage about the water cycle. She was patient, methodical, professional. I almost stopped listening. Then the tone changed. At the 23-minute mark, Lorraine's voice dropped to that low, sharp register I'd heard through the hallway wall. Nolan, put the pencil down. Look at me. Are you listening? I'm listening. No, you're not. You're thinking about something else. I can tell because your eyes go somewhere else when you stop paying attention. Do you know what happens to kids who don't pay attention? Silence from Nolan. They fail. They get held back. Their parents get angry and disappointed, and then nobody wants to be around them. Is that what you want? No. Then focus. And stop fidgeting. Every time you fidget, it tells me you don't respect my time. Do you respect my time, Nolan? Yes. You don't act like it. My jaw tightened. This was harsh. Unnecessarily harsh for a 9-year-old. But was it abuse? Was it enough to fire her over? I wasn't sure. I kept listening. At the 38-minute mark, the session shifted to math. Nolan got a problem wrong, a basic multiplication question, and Lorraine's response made my stomach drop. Again? Seriously? We did this exact problem last session. What's 8 times 6? Nolan's voice was barely audible. I don't remember. You don't remember because you don't care. Say it. Say what? Say I don't care about learning. I do care. Then why can't you get a simple problem right? Your dad is paying me a lot of money to help you, Nolan. A lot. And you're wasting it. Every session you waste, that's money your dad could have spent on something better. Does that make you feel good? No, it shouldn't. Now, 8 times 6. 48. Finally. Was that so hard? Try not to embarrass yourself next time. I paused the recording and stood up from my desk. My hands were shaking. Not from fear, but from anger, pure and volcanic and building behind my ribs like pressure in a sealed pipe. This woman was systematically destroying my son's self-worth. She was teaching him that he was stupid, worthless, a burden, a waste of money. Every session, 4 times a week, she was pouring poison into his ears while I sat 50 feet away in my office, thinking she was helping him. But I needed more. One recording of harsh words might not be enough. I needed a pattern, and I needed to understand if this was the worst of it, or just the surface of something deeper. I recorded 3 more sessions over the following week and a half. Each one was worse than the last. On the following Monday, Lorraine spent 15 minutes berating Nolan for misspelling the word February on a practice worksheet. She made him write it 30 times while she sat beside him, commenting on each attempt. Wrong again. Your handwriting is terrible. No wonder your teacher thinks you're stupid. She doesn't think I'm stupid. Trust me, Nolan. Adults talk about kids like you. They feel sorry for you. Your dad? He tells me how worried he is, how disappointed. My blood went cold. I had never, not once, used the word disappointed about Nolan in any conversation with anyone. She was fabricating my words, putting them in my mouth, and using them as weapons against my child. She was making him believe his own father thought he was a failure. That Wednesday, the recording captured something that changed everything. At the 51-minute mark, after a reading comprehension exercise, Lorraine told Nolan to close his workbook. I want to talk about something else now, she said. Her voice had shifted to something softer but wrong, intimate in a way that made the hair on my arms stand up. Nolan, you know I care about you, right? Yeah. More than your teacher does. More than most people. I'm the only one who's honest with you about how much work you need to do. Your parents just tell you everything's fine because they don't want to deal with your problems. But I deal with them. Every session. Because I actually care. Okay? And because I care, I need you to do something for me. What? I need you to not tell your dad about our conversations. Why? Because your dad wouldn't understand. He'd get confused and think I was being mean, but I'm not being mean. I'm being real with you. Adults don't always understand how real teaching works. If you tell him what we talk about, he'll fire me, and then you'll have nobody who actually cares enough to push you. Do you want that? No. So our sessions are private. What happens here stays between us. Okay? Okay. Good boy. That's the Nolan I like. The recording continued for another 38 minutes. More math drills, more degradation wrapped in the language of care, more small cruelties delivered with the precision of someone who'd done this before, many times, to other children. I sat in my office with the door closed and my head in my hands and cried. Not loud, heaving sobs. Quiet, suffocating tears that burned my eyes and tasted like salt and failure. My son had been asking for help in every way a 9-year-old knows how. The nightmares, the nail-biting, the withdrawn silence, the vomiting, the question, am I bad, Dad? And I'd missed it. I'd paid this woman $340 a week to psychologically torture my child, and I'd thanked her for her dedication. I called Justine first. It was 9:15 at night. Nolan was asleep. I sat in my car in the garage with the engine off and the door closed and told her everything. She didn't speak for a long time. When she finally did, her voice was made of ice and controlled fury. Play me the recordings, she said. I played her the worst segments through the phone. 3 minutes. That's all she could take. I'm driving to Charlotte tonight, she said. No. Listen to me. If you show up tonight, Lorraine will know something changed. She'll cover her tracks, or she'll disappear, or she'll contact the other families she works with and warn them. We need to do this right. For Nolan, and for every other kid she's done this to. Because Justine, she's done this before. This isn't amateur cruelty. This is practiced, systematic, and refined over years of access to vulnerable children behind closed doors while their parents sit in the next room trusting her. Justine was quiet. Then, what do? We call the police. Tonight. And tomorrow I call a lawyer. I dialed 911 at 10:08 p.m. from my car. The dispatcher routed me to the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department's Special Victims Unit. A detective called me back at 10:41. His name was Raymond Okafor, and he spoke with the measured calm of someone who'd heard terrible things so many times that the skill of remaining steady had become reflexive. He'd been with the SVU for 13 years, previously worked domestic violence cases in Atlanta, transferred to Charlotte in 2019. He asked me to describe what I'd heard. I played him segments of the recordings over the phone, the same way I'd played them for Justine. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for 8 seconds. Mr. Aldridge, he said carefully, what you're describing and what I'm hearing on these recordings constitutes emotional abuse of a minor under North Carolina General Statute 14-318.2, which covers contributing to the delinquency and neglect of a juvenile. Given the systematic nature, the isolation tactics, the deliberate undermining of parental relationships, and the secrecy demands, this may also qualify as a pattern of psychological maltreatment under the state's child abuse statutes. What I need from you tonight is to preserve every recording. Do not delete anything. Do not confront Ms. Ashby. Do not alter Nolan's tablet in any way. Can you bring the tablet and your phone to our office tomorrow morning at 8? Yes. Good. I'm also going to need contact information for every family listed on her website. If she's doing this to your son, Detective Okafor paused, she's doing it to others. I didn't sleep that night. At 6:15 in the morning, I was sitting at my kitchen table when Nolan came downstairs for breakfast. He was wearing his dinosaur pajamas with the hole in the left knee. His hair was sticking up on one side. He looked so small. He climbed onto his chair and poured himself a bowl of cereal, Frosted Mini Wheats, the same brand he'd eaten every morning since he was 6. Dad? Yeah, buddy. Is Lorraine coming today? My throat closed. I forced it open. Not today. How come? She's busy. Oh. He ate his cereal. Then he looked up at me with those brown eyes that still had a gap-toothed kid's trust somewhere behind the damage. Dad? Yeah? If Lorraine doesn't come back, is that okay? My eyes burned. I blinked hard. Yeah, buddy. That's very okay. He nodded slowly, went back to his cereal. Okay, he said quietly, and something in his small shoulders loosened, just a fraction of an inch, as though a weight he'd been carrying had shifted slightly, not gone, but acknowledged for the first time. I left Nolan with my neighbor, a retired schoolteacher named Gloria Fenton, who'd known him since he was a toddler and treated him like a grandson. I drove to the SVU offices on East 4th Street with Nolan's tablet sealed in a gallon-size freezer bag like Detective Okafor had instructed, along with my phone containing the Parent Shield app and every recording, time-stamped and cloud-stored. The SVU office was on the 3rd floor of a building that smelled like old coffee and floor wax. Okafor met me in the lobby, tall, broad-shouldered, clean-shaven, wearing a dark gray suit with no tie. He shook my hand and led me to an interview room with a metal table and 2 chairs. A woman was already seated there, a forensic interviewer named Dr. Priya Chakrabarti, a child psychologist with a PhD from Virginia Commonwealth and 14 years of experience conducting forensic interviews with minors for law enforcement agencies across the Carolinas. She specialized in cases of psychological abuse, coercive control, and emotional manipulation of children by authority figures, teachers, coaches, tutors, and religious leaders. We need to talk about what Nolan may have experienced beyond what the recordings capture, Dr. Chakrabarti said gently. Children who are subjected to this kind of systematic emotional abuse often don't disclose the full extent of what happened because the abuser has conditioned them to believe that silence is safety. Lorraine told him not to tell me, I said. She told him I wouldn't understand, that I'd fire her, and then he'd have nobody who cared about him. Dr. Chakrabarti nodded slowly, her expression clinical but not cold. That's a classic isolation tactic. She positioned herself as his only advocate, then used that perceived bond to control his behavior and silence. She manufactured dependency. The child believes the abuser is the only person who truly understands them, even as the abuser systematically destroys their sense of self. It creates a psychological trap. The more the child suffers, the more they believe they need the abuser to survive the suffering. Detective Okafor played the recordings through a speaker on the table, all 4 sessions, every minute. Dr. Chakrabarti took notes on a yellow legal pad, occasionally pausing to rewind specific segments. She flagged 6 distinct patterns across the recordings. First, identity erosion, repeated statements designed to make Nolan internalize failure as a permanent character trait rather than a temporary struggle. Second, parental alienation, fabricating my words to undermine Nolan's trust in me. Third, isolation conditioning, demanding secrecy under the threat of losing her supposed care. Fourth, shame cycling, alternating between harsh criticism and brief moments of warmth to create emotional dependency. Fifth, competence sabotage, deliberately choosing material too difficult for his level to guarantee failure and reinforce the narrative that he needed her. Sixth, gaslighting, telling him his perceptions were wrong and that her cruelty was actually love. This is not incidental, Dr. Chakrabarty said, setting down her pen. This is a methodology. She's done this before, probably many times. The control is too sophisticated for a first offense. Detective Okafor obtained Lorraine Ashby's full background that afternoon. What he found made the floor feel like it was tilting beneath me. Lorraine had worked as a classroom teacher at 2 different elementary schools in the Charlotte area before leaving to tutor privately. She left her first school, Oaklawn Elementary, in 2018 after 3 years. The official reason was voluntary resignation. But Okafor dug deeper, contacting the principal who'd been in charge during her tenure, a man named Franklin Dubose, now retired and living in Asheville. Dubose told Okafor that Lorraine had been the subject of 2 parent complaints in her final year. Both involved children who'd developed anxiety, sleep disturbances, and school avoidance behaviors while in her class. The complaints were investigated internally by the school district and dismissed due to insufficient evidence. Lorraine wasn't fired, but Dubose told her that the complaints would remain in her personnel file, and she resigned the following week. She surfaced at a second school, Pinewood Academy, a small private school in Ballantyne, in 2019. She lasted 11 months. 3 more complaints from parents. A child in her 2nd grade class began pulling out his own hair. Another developed a stammer that hadn't existed before. A third told her mother that Mrs. Ashby says I'm the dumbest kid she's ever taught, and I should just stop trying. Pinewood's headmaster, Dr. Colleen Rourke, confronted Lorraine directly. Lorraine denied everything, called the children liars, accused the parents of coaching their kids to defame her, and resigned before any formal investigation could begin. She started tutoring privately 6 months later, working one-on-one with children in their homes, with no institutional oversight, no colleagues observing her, no principal to file complaints with. Just her and a child at a dining room table behind a closed door, while a trusting parent worked in another room. Okafor contacted every family listed on Lorraine's website. 12 testimonials, 12 families. He reached 9 of them. 4 reported nothing unusual and said their children had positive experiences. 3 gave mixed reports, said their kids had improved academically, but seemed more anxious or withdrawn during the tutoring period, though they hadn't connected the two. 2 families broke down on the phone. The first was a father named Alistair Reeves in the Myers Park neighborhood. His daughter, Maisie, had been tutored by Lorraine for 5 months the previous year. Maisie developed severe anxiety, began refusing to go to school, and started wetting the bed at age 8 after being dry since 3. Alistair had taken Maisie to a child therapist who diagnosed her with acute stress disorder, but they never identified the source. When Alistair told the therapist about the tutoring sessions, the therapist flagged it as a possible contributing factor, but by then, Lorraine had already ended the arrangement, citing scheduling conflicts. The second was a mother named Diane Prescott in the Cotswold area. Her son, Julian, age 7, had been tutored by Lorraine for 3 months, and then attempted to run away from home by packing a backpack with granola bars and walking 4 blocks before a neighbor found him. When asked why, Julian said, "I'm too dumb to live here anymore. My tutor said so." Diane had fired Lorraine immediately, but never reported the incident to police because she said she didn't think emotional cruelty by a tutor was something you could report. She didn't think anyone would take it seriously. Armed with the recordings, Dr. Chakrabarty's analysis, the background investigation, and statements from the Reeves and Prescott families, Detective Okafor obtained a warrant to search Lorraine Ashby's apartment and seize her electronic devices, her laptop, phone, and an external hard drive. The search took place on a Thursday morning while Lorraine was at a coffee shop 3 blocks from her apartment, unaware. What investigators found on her laptop was chilling in its organization. She kept detailed files on every child she'd tutored, but not academic progress files, behavioral manipulation logs, notes on each child's psychological vulnerabilities, their insecurities, their family dynamics, which parents were attentive and which were distracted, which kids were more susceptible to shame and which responded to fear. She'd written clinical, almost academic entries about her methods. Nolan's file was 4 pages long. The first entry was dated from his second session with her. Nolan A., age 9. Father is present but occupied, works from home office during sessions, does not monitor directly. Mother is in Raleigh, limited daily oversight. Child is sensitive, eager to please, deeply afraid of parental disappointment. Extremely responsive to shame-based correction. High suitability. I read those words in a conference room at the SVU office while Okafor sat across from me and Dr. Chakrabarty stood by the window with her arms crossed. High suitability. She'd evaluated my son like a predator assesses prey. She'd identified his vulnerabilities, confirmed that I was too trusting and too distracted to notice, and then she'd gone to work, dismantling him from the inside out. 4 sessions a week at $85 an hour. I was paying her to psychologically dismantle my child, and her notes showed she'd planned it from the beginning. Lorraine Ashby was arrested at 3:15 p.m. on a Thursday afternoon at her apartment in the Plaza Midwood neighborhood of Charlotte. Okafor and 2 uniformed officers knocked on her door with a warrant for her arrest. The charges were 5 counts of contributing to abuse and neglect of a juvenile under North Carolina General Statute 14-318.2, 3 counts of child abuse through emotional maltreatment, and 1 count of obtaining property by false pretenses for collecting tutoring fees while deliberately undermining the academic progress she was paid to support. The false pretenses charge was the one that surprised me. It was Catherine Hughes' idea. Catherine was the attorney I'd retained the morning after I called the police, a family and criminal victims advocate with 11 years of practice, a degree from Wake Forest Law, and a reputation for being relentless. She'd handled 3 previous cases involving psychological abuse of minors by non-family authority figures, and she was the one who pushed the DA's office to include the fraud charge. She charged families for a service she was intentionally sabotaging, Catherine told me in her office on South Tryon Street, her voice controlled but fierce. She wasn't just abusing children. She was running a con. Parents paid her hundreds of dollars a week to help their kids, and she was deliberately ensuring they got worse so she could recommend more sessions and collect more fees. That's fraud. That's provable, documentable fraud, and the jury will understand it immediately. The arrest made the local news that evening. WCNC Charlotte ran a segment at 6 p.m. with the headline, "Charlotte Tutor Arrested on Child Abuse Charges." The story included Lorraine's professional headshot from her website, the one with the warm smile and the silver-framed glasses, next to her booking photo from Mecklenburg County Jail, where her expression was flat, emptied of the performative warmth she'd built her career on. Lorraine posted bail the next morning, $15,000, paid by her mother. She retained a defense attorney named Howard Slade, a criminal defense lawyer with a practice in uptown Charlotte who'd handled cases involving educators before. Slade's strategy became clear immediately. He issued a statement calling the charges an overreaction based on a father's misinterpretation of normal disciplinary tutoring methods. He argued the recordings were obtained without Lorraine's consent, violating North Carolina's one-party consent wiretapping laws. Catherine Hu anticipated this. North Carolina is a one-party consent state, she told me when I called her in a panic after seeing Slade's statement. That means only one party to the conversation needs to consent to the recording. Nolan was a party to those conversations. As his parent and legal guardian, you consented on his behalf. The recordings are admissible. Slade's argument collapsed in the first pretrial hearing. The judge, a woman named Honorable Claudia Ung, ruled the recordings admissible in their entirety. She listened to a 45-second excerpt in chambers, the segment where Lorraine told Nolan that his father was disappointed in him and that silence was required, then looked at Slade over her reading glasses and said, "Counsel, if you're planning to argue that this constitutes normal tutoring, I'd encourage you to reconsider your approach." The case went to trial 4 months later. By then, 2 more families had come forward after seeing the news coverage, bringing the total number of identified victims to 5 children across 4 years. The prosecution presented 63 minutes of audio recordings, Dr. Chakrabarty's expert analysis identifying 6 distinct patterns of psychological abuse, Lorraine's own handwritten manipulation logs seized from her laptop, testimony from Alistair Reeves and Diane Prescott, testimony from Franklin Dubose and Dr. Colleen Rourke documenting prior complaints at 2 schools, billing records showing Lorraine collected over $92,000 in tutoring fees from families during the 4 years she operated privately, and medical records from 3 children documenting anxiety disorders, stress reactions, and behavioral changes that began during their tutoring periods and resolved after they ended. Nolan did not testify. Dr. Chakrabarty conducted a forensic interview with him instead, video recorded with my consent and Justine's, which was presented to the jury. In the interview, Nolan sat in a small room with soft lighting and stuffed animals on the shelves and told Dr. Chakrabarty, in his small, careful voice, what Lorraine had said to him across those weeks. She said I was wasting my dad's money. She said my mom left because of me. She said if I told anyone, nobody would believe me because I'm just a kid and she's a grown-up. She said dumb kids don't get to have opinions. I watched the interview footage from a room next door through a one-way mirror with Justine beside me. Justine hadn't let go of my hand in 40 minutes. Her grip was so tight that my fingers were numb, but I didn't pull away. On the screen, Nolan looked at Dr. Chakrabarty with his brown eyes and his gap-toothed mouth and said, "She said my mom left because of me." And Justine made a sound I'd never heard a human being make before, low and guttural and broken, the sound of a mother's heart cracking clean in half. I put my arm around her, and we sat there, 2 divorced parents in a police building watching their son describe how a stranger had convinced him he was worthless. The jury deliberated for 3 hours and 14 minutes. They found Lorraine Ashby guilty on all counts. Judge Ung sentenced her to 4 years in state prison, with eligibility for parole after 2, plus a lifetime ban from working with minors in any capacity in North Carolina. Her teaching certificate was permanently revoked. Her name was added to the state's registry of individuals prohibited from employment in educational or childcare settings. Howard Slade filed an appeal, and it was denied 8 months later by a 3-judge panel that called the evidence overwhelming and the sentence proportionate. The civil suit Catherine Hu filed on behalf of my family and the Reeves and Prescott families resulted in a combined judgment of $318,000, most of which Lorraine didn't have, but the judgment followed her and would for the rest of her life. Catherine also pushed for legislative action, working with a state representative named Arthur Gladwell to draft a bill requiring private tutors in North Carolina to undergo background checks and register with the Department of Public Instruction. The bill, informally called Nolan's Law by advocates, was introduced in the General Assembly in the spring and passed committee review. As of the time I'm telling this story, it hadn't been voted on yet, but Catherine told me it had strong bipartisan support. Nolan started therapy 3 days after Lorraine's arrest. His therapist was a child psychologist named Dr. Amara Osei, a warm, patient woman in her mid-40s who specialized in recovery from emotional abuse in school-age children. She had a small office in the South Park area of Charlotte with beanbag chairs and a sand tray and shelves full of art supplies. Nolan went twice a week for the first 3 months, then once a week after that. Progress was slow and uneven and sometimes heartbreaking. There were setbacks, weeks where the nightmares returned, where he flinched when an adult raised their voice, where he told Dr. Osei that he still heard Lorraine's voice in his head when he got an answer wrong on a test. But there were breakthroughs too, small ones at first, then larger. He started building marble runs again in February. He raised his hand in class for the first time in months on a Wednesday in March, and Mrs. Adebayo emailed me about it with 3 exclamation points. He told a joke at dinner one night, a terrible pun about dinosaurs that made no sense, and laughed so hard at his own joke that milk came out of his nose, and I sat across from him laughing and crying simultaneously and pretending it was the milk that made my eyes water. In April, Nolan came home from school with a reading comprehension test scored at 86%. He put it on the refrigerator himself, held there with a magnet shaped like a triceratops. "Dad," he said, looking at the paper on the fridge, "I don't think I'm dumb." My throat tightened. "You never were, buddy. I know. But I had to figure that out by myself. She took that away from me, and I had to find it again. 9-year-olds shouldn't have to find themselves again. They shouldn't have to rebuild what an adult deliberately destroyed. They shouldn't have to sit in a therapist's office and learn that the voice in their head telling them they're worthless isn't their own voice, but a weapon someone planted there on purpose. No child should have to recover from an experience that happened in their own dining room while their father sat 50 feet away, trusting the person who was hurting them. I think about that distance constantly, 50 feet, the length of my hallway, the space between my office and the dining room table where Lorraine sat beside my son and whispered poison into his ears 4 days a week. 50 feet and a closed door, and the sound of my keyboard clicking while I designed drainage systems and assumed that the professional I'd hired to help my child was doing exactly that. I think about the 12 testimonials on her website and the parents who wrote them, some of whom had no idea what had happened to their children, and some of whom noticed the damage but never connected it to the smiling woman with the canvas tote bag and the silver-framed glasses. I think about Maisie Reeves wetting the bed at 8 years old, and Julian Prescott packing a backpack with granola bars because his tutor told him he was too dumb to live in his own house. I think about the system that let Lorraine resign from 2 schools without consequence and set up shop in private homes where no one was watching. Nolan is 10 now. He's in 5th grade. His grades are solid Bs with an occasional A in science, which is his favorite subject. He built a model volcano for the science fair last month, the baking soda and vinegar kind, and it erupted beautifully, red foam everywhere, and he stood beside it grinning with that gap-toothed smile, while Justine and I took approximately 200 photographs. He still sees Dr. Osei every other week. He still has moments where the shadow crosses his face, and I know he's hearing that voice. But the moments are shorter now, further apart, less powerful. The marble runs are back, more elaborate than ever, spanning his entire bedroom floor, and when the marble reaches the bottom and lands in the cup he set up as a target, he throws his arms up like he just scored the winning goal of a championship game. She told him nobody believed in him. She told him his parents were disappointed and his teacher thought he was stupid and he was wasting everyone's time and money. She told him to keep it secret because no one would listen to a kid. She was wrong about all of it, every single word. And now she has 4 years behind bars to think about the 9-year-old boy who she said was too dumb to matter, the one who put his reading test on the refrigerator and held it there with a triceratops magnet and said, "I had to find it again." He found it. And she lost everything. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.